Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janaballabha Giri Paradari. Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Banachari. Jaira Madhava Kunja Vihari. Hare He Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Om Vishnupad, Paramhasa Parvajikacharya, Tadasata, Srimad, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki, Grantarad Srimad Bhāgavatam Ki, Samveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki, Gaur Premananda. All glories to some devotees. All glories to some devotees. All glories to some devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Anmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Didati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanbitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. So today we are on Canto 3, Chapter 28, Text 11. Is that correct? The Astanga Yoga Pranayam system. Pranayama the head doshan. Pranayama the head doshan. Dharanabhischa kilbishan. Dharanabhischa kilbishan. Pratyaharena samsargan. Pratyaharena samsargan. Dhyanena nishvaran gunan. Dhyanena ishvaran gunan. Pranayamarda hedoshan. Dharanabhischa kilvishan. Pranaharena samsargan. Dhyanena nishvaran gunan. Pranayamarda hedoshan. Dharanabhischa kilvishan. Pratyaharena samsargan. Dhyanena ishvaran gunan. Pranayamarda hedoshan. Dharanabhischa kilvishan. Pratyaharena samsargan. Dhyanena ishvaran gunan. Pranayamarda hedoshan. Dharanabhishcha kilbishan pratyaharena samsargan dhyanena ishvaran gunan. Vaishnavis? Pranayamayardahedoshan dharanabhishcha kilbishan pratyaharena samsargan dhyanena ishvaran gunan. Vaishnavis? Pranayamayardahedoshan dharanabhishcha kilbishan pratyaharena samsargan dhyanena ishvaran gunan. Pranayamayardahedoshan dharanabhishcha kilbishan pratyaharena samsargan dhyanena ishvaran gunan. Pranayamai, by practice of pranayam. Dahet, one can eradicate. Doshan, contaminations. Dharanabhihi, by concentrating the mind. Cha, and. Kilbishan, sinful activities. Pratyaharena, by restraining the senses. Samsargan, material association. Dhyanena, by meditating. Anishvaran gunan, the modes of material nature. So this translation reads, by practicing the process of pranayam, one can eradicate the contamination of his physiological condition. And by concentrating the mind, one can become free from all sinful activities. By restraining the senses, one can free himself from material association. And by meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become free from the three modes of material attachment. So we can do this responsibly. By practicing the process of pranayam, one can eradicate the contamination of his physiological condition. And by concentrating the mind, one can become free from all sinful activities. By restraining the senses, one can free himself from material association. And by meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become free from the three modes of material attachment. Okay, so the purport. All right, here's. Thank you. The purport reads, according to Ayurvedic medical science, the three items, kapha, pitta, and vayu, phlegm, bile, and air, maintain the physiological condition of the body. Modern medical science does not accept this physiological analysis as valid, but ancient Ayurvedic processes of treatment is the ancient Vedic process of treatment is based upon these items. Ayurvedic treatment concerns itself with the cause of these three elements, which are mentioned in many places in Bhāgavatam as the basic conditions of the body. Here it is recommended that by practicing the breathing process of pranayam, one can be released from contamination created by the principal physiological elements. By concentrating the mind, one can become free from sinful activities. And by withdrawing the senses, one can free himself from material association. Ultimately, one has to meditate on the Supreme Personality of Godhead in order to be elevated to the transcendental position, where he no longer is affected by the three modes of material nature. It is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita that one who engages himself in unalloyed devotional service at once becomes transcendental to the three modes of material nature and immediately realizes his identification with Brahman. Sagunan samatityaitan Brahma bhuyai kulpate. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 14, text 26. For every item in the yoga system, there's a parallel activity in the bhakti yoga system. But practice of bhakti yoga is easier for this age. What was introduced by Lord Chaitanya is not a new interpretation. Bhakti yoga is a feasible process and begins with chanting and hearing. Bhakti yoga and other yogas have as their ultimate goal the same personality of Godhead. But one is practical and the others are difficult. One has to purify his physiological condition by concentration and by restraint of the senses. Then he can fix his mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and this is called samadhi. Pranayamardaheddoshan dharanabhish chakilbishan pratyaharena samsargan dhyanenan ishvaran gunan. By practicing the process of pranayam, one can eradicate the contamination of his physiological condition. And by concentrating the mind, one can be freed from all sinful activities. By restraining the senses, one can free himself from material association. And by meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become free from the three modes of material attachment. So, of course, actually, by concentrating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can achieve all those things. The process of Krishna consciousness is sometimes described as overcoming the modes of nature. Sometimes it's described as developing love of Godhead. Sometimes it's described as controlling the mind. Sometimes it's described as becoming purified from mundane association or contaminations. So all these things are true, and essentially all these different things are essentially the same thing, more or less. Some can be considered to be stages of others or different points in time, but we have many processes described in the Vedic literatures, and in the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, he describes many different processes to Arjuna. And he describes these processes so that Arjuna will understand the whole scope of the Vedic possibilities. And then Krishna gets around in the end of the 6th chapter to explain what he actually wants Arjuna to do. So first he kind of explains all these different things. Buddhi Yoga, Sankhya, he talks about Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Astanga Yoga. He talks about all these different things. But in the end, he just tells Arjuna, better than the tapasvi, better than the jnani, better than the karmi is the yogi, so be a yogi. And then he tells him what kind of yogi he wants to be. Of all yogis, one who constantly engages in me, meditating on me. Such a yogi is the highest of all. Of course, here, from verses 1 through verse 12, which is tomorrow's verse, we're hearing Kapila Dev explain to his mother Devahuti about the system of Ashtanga Yoga. Particularly, the first 12 verses are about the pranayama system, controlling the breathing. And as Prabhupada says in the purport, every aspect of the Bhakti Yoga system has a parallel in the Ashtanga Yoga system and vice versa. So the two are very similar because essentially they're accomplishing the same goal. But the methodology in one is obviously externally different from the methodology in the other, although there are analogous elements. And as Prabhupada says, Bhakti Yoga is easy and practicable, whereas Ashtanga Yoga, not so much. In fact, most people would never be able to get any kind of progress accomplished in the Ashtanga Yoga system. Most people would fail, especially in the age of Kali. And so this is a recurring theme through much of Vedic literature, especially the writings of our acharyas, and that's why they say that one can't trust the process of jnana, one can't trust the process of karma, one can't trust the process of Ashtanga Yoga, but one can trust the process of bhakti. And as someone was mentioning a day or two ago, that without practicing some level of bhakti, the other processes won't work at all without recognizing that bhakti is an inherent element. One will fail at pranayama, one will fail at Ashtanga Yoga, one will fail at karma yoga or jnana yoga, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing I also like to point out is that when we say the path of jnana yoga, we mean the path of unfocused speculation on what the nature of the Supreme is. That we don't want to have anything to do with. On the other side, when we're talking about transcendental knowledge, as Krishna does in Bhagavad Gita, that we want to have everything to do with. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains about transcendental knowledge. Of course, he first touches it in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where he talks about what he calls Buddhi Yoga, which is the knowledge of the intelligent, or the yoga of the intelligent. And then in fourth chapter, of course, is called transcendental knowledge. And then again in the ninth chapter, Krishna again talks about transcendental knowledge. So in many of these verses, Krishna eulogizes transcendental knowledge. So transcendental knowledge is not the same as the path of speculation. So they're both sometimes called jnana yoga. So one is just simply speculating. That's the wrong kind, and we don't want to have anything to do with that because it's a waste of time. On the other side of the coin, if one is understanding the nature of the Supreme Lord, that we want to have everything to do. As Krishna says, there's nothing so sublime and pure as transcendental knowledge. And then, also in chapter 9, the most confidential knowledge, he says, Raja Vidya Raja Guyam Pavajarnina Mutamam Pratyak Savagamam Dharmam Shushukam Kartamavyam. This is knowledge. The king of education, secret of all secrets, etc., etc. So we want knowledge. So also, sometimes Krishna consciousness is described as getting knowledge. So on the surface, these things seem very different. Rising in the three modes, developing love of Godhead, getting knowledge, focusing the mind, identifying with the supersoul. These, on the surface, appear to be different things, but actually they're all essentially the same thing. If one is actually focused on the bhakti version of them. So when we talk about transcendental knowledge, what is it? In a nutshell, transcendental knowledge is one very simple thing. We know that we are servant of Krishna, we are part of Krishna, and we are trying to serve Krishna with all of our heart all the time. We may not be able to come to that standard right away, but that's what we're headed towards. That is transcendental knowledge. You've got the PhD in it now, so nothing more to discuss about it. If you recognize that, you basically understood what we mean by transcendental knowledge. So in this verse, Prabhupada mentions the dhatus, and of course that's the key fundamental aspect of Ayurveda, that you have kapha, pitta, and vayu, or mucus, bile, and air. And these three are considered to need to be balanced in the body. So if there's too much kapha or too much pitta or too much vayu, it's an imbalance in the body, and much of Ayurveda is about balancing these three, and therefore the person would be in health. Also in the Ayurveda, it's assumed that all disease starts in the digestion. So if one not digesting well, then one will head towards various diseases. And modern medical science is finally starting to come around to that concept, but it's very slow, and it's just on the periphery. You know, for the most part, modern medical science is palliative. In other words, whatever disease we have, they don't cure the disease, they just make us try to live our lives without being too inconvenienced by it. So it masks the symptoms only. But actually, real medicine means to find out what the problem is and to cure it, get rid of it, and then naturally the symptoms go away. So these dhatus are, as Prabhupada puts it in this purport, they cause suffering for the living entity if they get out of alignment. And this is various diseases. In other places, Prabhupada talks about how these cause extreme suffering, especially towards the time of death. In, I believe it's 4th canto, we hear about King Puranjana and the city of 9 gates. So King Puranjana is an allegory, and King Puranjana is the living entity, and he lives in a city of 9 gates. And maybe you can guess what the city of 9 gates is. It's the body. Why does it have 9 gates? Because we have 9 holes in the body. 2 eyes, 2 ears, holes, that's 4. 2 nostril holes, that's 6. And then we have the mouth, which is 7. And we have the anus and genitals, 8 and 9. So we have 9 holes in the body. And in the allegory of Puranjana and the city of 9 gates, it explains how he tries to enjoy the world by going out each one of these gates at different times, and what kind of enjoyments he has, you know, what kind of enjoyments we get through the eye holes, what kind of enjoyments we get through the ear holes, and what kind of enjoyments we get through the nostrils, what kind of enjoyment we get through the mouth, and of course everybody knows about the enjoyments we get through the genitals. However, there's also enjoyments through the rectal opening as well. So all these things are there. And of course, the anus is considered the passageway to horrible death. So in death, if someone has lived a very wretched life, then they will pass from their body, not through the Brahmarandra on the top of the head, but through the anus. And that is supposed to be very traumatic. And this is all described in the Vedic literature. And as Prabhupada says in the purports, modern medical science doesn't find much value in the dhatus. Interesting side point. In Europe, these tree dhatus were also considered an important part of medicine for a long time. So this wasn't just confined to India. But most medicine in medieval Europe, until we get to the modern age where science started to take things in a wild direction, was also, they had this idea of balancing. Sometimes they were thinking it was overabundance of blood or something like that. There's another aspect of the Ayurveda where we hear about something called the where is it here? Saptatvak, or 7 coverings of the body, which are skin, fat, muscle, bone, blood, and marrow, and finally semina. So, by the way, for women, there's a similar fluid, although I don't know its name. These 7 things are important features of the body, and if they're in proper, organization, proper alignment, one will be healthy. So here we're finding that by practicing pranayama, so this was how yoga was supposed to benefit health and then eventually bring one to some realization of the Supreme. By drilling the breathing, we balance the nadis in the air channels. So in the City of 9 Gates, King Paranjana is protected by a 5-headed serpent. And the 5-headed serpent is the 5 life airs. So the life airs connect the consciousness to the physical body. They have that property. And if one's life airs are out of balance, then one's body will similarly go out of balance. So that was one way the yoga system did it. By, of course, we know that the Ashtanga system starts with yama niyam, or prohibitions and imperatives. So there are things we have to do and things we have to avoid. And as Param Brahma said yesterday, sometimes the things we have to avoid are more important than things we have to do. So we have to understand what kind of things should be left out of our lives, particularly smoking and meat eating, intoxication, illicit sex, these things. If these things are part of our lives, we can do yoga, till the cows come home. And we won't really benefit our body, even our body, what to speak of reaching some kind of transcendental platform. But that's the idea, that we're hearing here about Krishna consciousness from the angle of purifying the body. We're hearing about it from the angle of concentrating the mind. We're hearing about it from the angle of withdrawing from the senses. And here in this verse, we have much of the pranayama, or not the pranayama, but the Ashtanga Yoga system language here, So we have pranayama, which is one of the aspects of yoga. We don't see the word hatha there, but then we have dharana, which is concentration or meditation. Actually, I think it's concentration. Dharana is concentration. Then we have pratyaharana, which is withdrawing the senses. So all these concepts we've been talking about. And dhyana, so dhyana is to meditate. So these are all one of the various ashta, or 8 stages of the pranayama system. And tomorrow's verse kind of ends the pranayama system as far as discussing that. And then from verses 13 through 19, we have the vision of the perfected yogi. That's what we're going to be hearing about. And then from 20 to 33, we're going to have meditating on the Supreme Lord. And then 34 to 44, the result of fixed meditation. So that's kind of how this chapter is laid out. And it's very similar to what Krishna is talking about in 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, because we're hearing about one getting transcendental knowledge. And once one gets transcendental knowledge, he explains that one doesn't connect with the senses, that although the senses are active, one is eating, sleeping, moving about, etc., still he knows only the senses are active with their objects, and he is aloof from them. So towards the end of 5th chapter, we hear about this idea of being liberated by focusing on the super soul, which is the last thing that's mentioned here. So by meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become freed from the 3 modes of material attachment. So if we meditate on the super soul, or meditate on the Supreme Personality of God, it doesn't have to be the super soul. In the yoga system, it is the super soul, the Astanga yoga system, but in the Bhakti yoga system, it's Krishna directly, the form Krishna. And if we meditate, then all these things can be accomplished. So if we do the positive, we automatically accomplish the negatives. If we are able to somehow or other, like starting a fire in a damp, wooded area, if we can somehow get the spark to catch a few dry enough twigs and kindling, then it might start to take off. And once the fire is roaring, then even wet wood can be put in there, and eventually it'll dry out and burn, So that's our situation. So at the present moment, we are like trying to rub rocks together to get a spark so we can get the fire going and ignite our spiritual life. But at some point, the fire will be going, and once the fire gets big, it can burn up anything. It can catch our whole life. And that's why sometimes, of course, devotees say, "Are you fired up?" So that's been an ISKCONism for quite some time, being fired up, So we are trying to be in the fire of Krishna consciousness. And that can be done by performing Krishna consciousness, struggling with it, trying to keep focused, and eventually Krishna will give us a little taste. Once we get taste, once we genuinely begin to appreciate who Krishna is, not just theoretically, but we begin to we begin to get a taste for Krishna, then we can automatically not worry much about controlling the senses. We won't be really very attracted to them. So if someone genuinely appreciates Krishna and gets the taste from within, then all the external tastes are pale by comparison, and one will not be interested in them. So in this way, we've controlled the dhatus. In this way, we've controlled the modes of nature. In this way, we've controlled the senses. And actually, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's the story where Lord Chaitanya was experiencing various ecstasies. And he used the analogy of saying he had a dhatu imbalance. And he was experiencing, mental craziness as a result. So the dhatus, if they're not balanced, they throw off the body, and then the body can create a mental problem. And so he was saying that he wanted just one drop of the nectar of association with the Supreme Lord, yet the doctor was very cruel and didn't allow him even a single drop. And the doctor, of course, was Krishna himself. So he was wanting one drop of the medication, which was Krishna's pastimes and the relishing of the nectar of Krishna's relationship. But the doctor was Krishna and was not allowing him even one drop, and therefore he was mentally deranged. And so sometimes people saw Lord Chaitanya as having some kind of mental problem, especially if you read the Antya Lila, where just time after time after time, Lord Chaitanya is doing something totally bizarre. He goes to the ocean and jumps in thinking it's Jamuna, and a fisherman finds him in his net. The fisherman touches Lord Chaitanya, and he says that when I touched this dead body I found floating, I started chanting Hare Krishna. I was inhabited by a ghost, and please find a spirit tamer for me, someone who can exorcise the ghost. And of course, when the associates of Lord Chaitanya heard that, they knew he must have found Lord Chaitanya. And they said, no, you don't need a spirit tamer. You're very fortunate. You've developed an attraction for the holy name. And, you know, Lord Chaitanya went wandering around in the middle of the night, and his limbs contracted within his body, and the cows were licking him, and the devotees found him. And sometimes in the middle of the night, he would rub his face against the wall, and big scars, and, you know, would come as a result of that. And he did so many things. Of course, one time he heard that Krishna was in his heart, and he started to rip his chest open so he could get to Krishna in there. And he was told by one of the devotees that, I think it was Gadadhar that told him that he didn't need to do that. So this is the nature of breaking through finally, when the fire gets fully going, when all the wet wood is starting to dry out, and even wet wood can burn in that circumstance. So let me see if there's anything else I really wanted to say before I want to leave some time for back and forth. So the three modes are being mentioned here because oftentimes we hear about Krishna consciousness from the standpoint of getting free from the modes. There is, you know, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Tamas is the mode of ignorance, which we want to be completely free from, and rajas is also the mode of passion, which we're trying to eradicate as well. It's better than ignorance, but it's also not transcendental. And the mode of goodness is the best of the modes, but we also want to be freed from modes of goodness in its tainted version. So the mode of goodness is the tainted version that we generally experience in this world. When the mode of goodness is fully purified, it's called Suddhasattva, and that's non-different than the spiritual world. So Suddhasattva is pure goodness. And if we continue in devotional service, we go from modified or tainted goodness to pure goodness. What we mean by tainted goodness is goodness with some tinges of rajas and tamas in it. And that's the kind of goodness we find in the material world, where people are living lives that are more or less, stable lives that are actually virtuous, but they don't have the focus on the Supreme Lord. So that's a kind of modified goodness. So we hear about the three modes of nature. We hear first Krishna talks a little bit about it in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, then the third chapter, and a little bit in the fourth chapter. And then we finally get the three modes of nature sort of more described in the 14th chapter. And then, of course, in the 17th and 18th chapter. So largely in the 14th, 17th, and 18th chapter, we hear a lot about the modes of nature, how one can rise above them. And this is an important thing. So if we rise above the modes of nature, it's because we're controlling the senses. If we rise above the modes of nature, it's because we are focusing on the Supreme. So I'll leave this time for any questions or comments, and please use the microphone if you have any questions or comments about any of these things.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you. I was reminded of a verse when you were mentioning about once someone takes up to the process of knowing Krishna, then they immediately lose taste from 2nd chapter of 1st canto. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayati Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Cha Yada Hetukam. I was wondering, sometimes we experience that in the initial years of Krishna consciousness we feel very enthused about the process, and sometimes we see that it dwindles away, we take things for granted. Now, is it because of two reasons? Is it because we have experienced Krishna and then now we're forgetting him, or did we really never experience Krishna in the beginning? It was just kind of like a shadow experience of Krishna consciousness.
Well, in the beginning, I think generally Krishna makes it easy to get a good taste, but then he makes you work for it after a while. And of course, another way to explain this, and the way usually Prabhupada would explain this, is that in the onset of devotional service, you just want to connect with Krishna, and you do not understand about offenses. And also because you're fresh to the concepts of Krishna consciousness, the offenses aren't held against you very seriously. But of course, if you want to progress in Krishna consciousness, you have to learn what the offenses are and begin to avoid them. And if you either don't learn or don't avoid, then the taste for Krishna consciousness begins to sag. And if you commit enough offenses, you'll leave Krishna consciousness, at least for a time, because that's the way the process works. And so simultaneously, we have to engage in Krishna consciousness, and we have to scrupulously avoid offenses. Otherwise, we will form a zigzag pattern through the process of Krishna consciousness. And it's much better to just do a gradual rising line in Krishna consciousness. We're ramping up rather than zigzagging back and forth. But usually that's what happens. Either a person becomes lax or a person becomes offensive, and then the taste of Krishna consciousness tends to recede. And when it does, our motivation in Krishna consciousness turns to recede, because we think, I'm doing all this stuff, and what am I getting out of it? Just a lot of headache. So maybe I'll join the Boy Scouts or something like that. Go back home, back to mom head or something like that.
So that initial taste that we get, that Krishna makes it easy for us, is that genuine, or is that kind of like?
No, it's described in, at least for the holy name, we hear in the Harinam Chintamani, there's something called the holy name has 3 stages. It has Sudanam is the highest stage. Then there is the stage of what's the word? What's that? Namabhas, and then there's a stage of Namaparad. So Namaparad is where we're making offenses, or and usually that refers to people who have an improper conception of the holy name. They think that it's a tool for them to become God. That's an offensive attitude. However, most are in namabhas. So abhas means nearness or reflection. Whenever we are watching the sun come up, at the beginning, obviously, we don't see the ball of the sun, but we notice that the horizon is starting to lighten. And so that's kind of the concept behind abhas. So we are getting a genuine taste of the holy name or of Krishna consciousness, but it's not we're not actually witnessing the full sunrise yet. But even that abhas is way ahead of any material happiness. And in general, it can happen that in the beginning, devotees get lots of mercy from the Supreme. They get a taste, and they may catch glimpses. And so sometimes it's kind of just sneak previews. We get a little bit of a taste, a little bit of a view, a little bit of an emotional sense of what it will be like when we genuinely connect with the Supreme Lord. And then it disappears. And then we have to work at it to purify ourselves, to get rid of the modes, to gain transcendental knowledge, to try to cultivate an attraction for Krishna, to get more fully concentrated on devotional service, control the mind, control the senses. All these things are different analogies for what we do when we're trying to become more Krishna conscious.
Thank you for the class, Maharaj. Hare Krishna. So, one thing that came to mind in this particular conversation, especially because you mentioned that there's, with Ayurveda, and this is a progressive process for taming the modes within our body, taming the gunas within our body, even on a physical level, balancing the airs. This is one process. And I actually noticed sometimes that among devotees, there are two kind of methods for advancement. You see some devotees become very much scrutinizing about how to follow all these rules and regulations very nicely, how to keep their body very nicely healthy, how to keep their mind very balanced and peaceful. They kind of progress in devotional service in this way. Everything is very much like according to the rules. And then there are other people who are more like avaduts. In other words, they have some very strong desire for the attraction. Like you said, that fire, they want to start that fire, but they kind of ignore the body, ignore traditional behavior, and they just make that their sole focus. And in that way, they also sometimes attain the goal. So, at least if that question makes sense, it's a little hard to express it properly.
I think I know what you're asking, though, because
Yeah.
I think a lot of devotees have that basic question or concern. Do we just try to make the body to properly maintain the body, or shall we neglect the body? And I think that gets into the nature of the devotee themselves. Even among great exalted devotees, we have examples of both things. We have devotees who just basically blew their body out, by not paying any attention to various important things of maintenance of the body. And we have devotees who were very scrupulous about taking care of their body. Madhvacharya, I think, was particularly health conscious and very robust in his physical form. And, he did a lot of things. Of course, he did some things that were kind of out there, like eating several thousand bananas or something like that at one point. But in general, he was very physically powerful, and, he felt that was an important part. Whereas you have, examples of devotees who didn't eat, or even devotees who were very sick, et cetera, et cetera. And I think both things are a legitimate way. Sometimes devotees break through to a deep level of connection with the Supreme Lord, and they honestly can't be bothered with the body. And that definitely shortens their time with us here on the material world, but you can hardly find fault with that, On the other side of the coin, some devotees think, well, if I become, if I don't care for my body, it's going to become sick and broken down, and then I won't be able to do service. And that's also very legitimate, because if we don't make an effort to maintain the body to some extent, then likely we will wind up not, in some kind of ecstasy focusing on Krishna, but in some kind of negative ecstasy focusing on some kind of medical remedies, I would say in general devotees should make an effort to take care of their body. There are some who won't, and at a higher advanced stage, there are devotees who, just can't be bothered, and we can't really see that as being wrong. Prabhupada himself didn't take care of his issue with, I think he had some kind of, what was it, not diabetes or something like that, and he never really did anything specifically to offset it, and it apparently was one of the factors a lot of people cite as why he left his body. But again, those things are hard to know, even from a medical standpoint. But a devotee does what they do, and they care for their body. Especially in the beginning, we should try to, as much as possible, not run the body into some kind of medical problem through neglect. But toward the latter stages, when devotees have been devotees for a long time, they're nearing the end of their lives anyways, in one way or another, and they're experiencing a high degree of Krishna consciousness. Such devotees may just kind of forget about the whole process. That's how I would respond to it. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we're at the hour, a little bit after, a minute or two. So thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Srimad Bhāgavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.